Join me in welcoming Jon Beckwith Moore. Hey, Jon, how you doing today?
Doing great, Steve. How are you, sir?
Doing so good, thanks. First off, just tell us a little bit about you and how you show up in the world.
Well, I had an episode in a number of years ago where I was pursuing a rock and roll record deal in Hollywood, and I met a guy that unfortunately tried to kill me. And through a number of events where I fell off a fourth-floor balcony, I really had what you would call a hit bottom moment. I tried everything in the world, all the things that the world has to offer: money, fame, drugs, sex, alcohol, all the different things that are supposed to make you happy. And not only did it almost kill me, but it brought me to a profound experience where I realized there was something greater at work in my life. And I believed that that was God. And as I pursued it and looked into it and saw what I believed was proof without a shadow of a doubt of the fact that Jesus really lived, he really died, and he is really who he said he was, it changed my life. And people say, oh, well, Christians don't have any fun. Well, you know what? I haven't had for the last 30 years, whatever it's been, I've never had so much fun in my entire life as I do now. And it's without all of those things that potentially kill you. And so I'm very, very tickled and happy that God saw a way to keep me alive to help me do that.
One of the things I love most about your story is, and you alluded to it, um, most people get to a point where they hit rock bottom, they hit that bottom. You literally hit that bottom.
Yeah, literally. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
man. Um, and yeah, most definitely. Everybody always says, I shouldn't be alive, but you could really look back at that moment and be like, yeah, nobody understands how I'm
Well,
alive.
I'm from the Midwest, and I've seen people fall off ladders cleaning their gutters and die. And I fell, what is that, 50 something feet, broke both legs, my arm, my skull. If they hadn't got me to the hospital, it would have been over. So God had to have a hand in it, because like we, talked before about how people, they run into things and die, and it just is their time, I guess. And thankfully, God used a variety of things to not only keep me alive and heal me, but open my eyes.
I absolutely love that. So, um, after literally coming to the end of yourself, what was the thing that really helped you see the truth of things?
Well, for me, I grew up again in the Midwest. My parents were both Christians, and my oldest memory was kneeling down with my father and saying the Lord's Prayer at his side of the bed. And my mother always told me about Jesus. And so as I grew up and became rebellious, I looked back and realized, these are my parents. I love them. They believed that they taught me this when I was very young. And as I went through this experience, it caused me to look back and think about, wait a minute, is there really more to this than what I could have ascertained and what the world was trying to tell us at that time in my life about, and still today, that if it feels good, do it. All these things, you're your own person, you write your own ticket, your truth is yours, all of that stuff that I've come to believe is nonsense. But what got me to really believe this is I looked at it from a academic standpoint, and I went back and I started to read things in not just the Bible accounts, but historians like Josephus and some of these guys that had no axe to grind. They worked for the Romans as historians. And as I started to add up and look at these things, and then, even on later, where the guy from the Chicago Tribune, who was an avowed atheist, and he wrote a story, he took upon himself to prove that it was not true, and ended up finding out that it was all true. And then he ended up giving his life to Jesus as a result of that. So I went through a number of these historical fact-finding things, in addition to what I felt within myself, and a lot of that based upon what my parents had taught me. And I came to the conclusion pretty quickly, there's a lot more here than what the world would allow you to believe. And it opened my eyes to a point to where I thought, what, this really is true. The historians in that day proved it. The people in this day I can't remember all the names of the people, who I've read about, but they've done the historical studies as well and come to the same conclusion. And I realized that this was something bigger than me, and it caused me very quickly to give my life to Jesus and to seek what his truths were. And ever since then, again, it's been 30 some odd years, but I feel like I have found a life that is healthy. I've found a way to be happy in a way that I never could have before, or never was able to before.
I love that. And, we actually even had Josh McDowell a couple of years ago on the show with his book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict,
Yes.
you were referring to. And
Yes.
yeah, that's pretty cool. So, all right. So, rock and roll becomes, now you work as a minister at a church. What was it like making that transition? I mean, it wasn't obviously an overnight thing. You talked about it being the 30 years. Talk to us a little bit about that trip from, being the broken, literally, version of yourself to, standing up in front and ministering at church.
Well, when this all happened, and again, and you hit it on the head, I was truly broken in every way, physically and mentally, emotionally. The girl that I had, wanted to marry, I mean, we split up, so I didn't have anybody. My mother, thank God, was able to come out and be there with me as I went through all these surgeries to, they had to drill holes in my legs from my hips to my knees to put steel rods in. Had to, my left arm, I'm left-handed, had to put it in a thing where they had 4 steel rods in my arm. And then they had to cut my head open and do a craniotomy, which was to clear the blood clot that was from the fall that would have killed me. So when I went through all of this and came back home, I literally was completely broken, and I was very happy that I was alive and that I believed and credited God. And of course, my mother did as well, that this was how I survived all of this. But then I started to, play music. And again, being left-handed and with a guitar, you have to use your left hand. For me, I'm left-handed, but I play right-handed. So my left hand is on the neck. And so little by little, I started to gain my strength back to where I could make chords on the guitar. I could play the piano, mostly with my right hand. But then as I got more strength in my left hand, and as I started to do this, I went to a church there in my hometown in Southeast Missouri, and they had a youth group at the time, and they encouraged me to, give my testimony and sing songs. And so I got involved in their choir, and I started to do a lot of the things. And because of being in a church growing up Methodist, I knew a fair number of the hymns that I'd grown up with, the things like Amazing Grace, the Old Rugged Cross. And so as we started to sing more and more of those, and the contemporary music, of that day started to resonate with me, I started to find kind of a voice, if you will, musically in some of that, mostly at the time as a choir member. I did solos, I played some music and stuff, did some songs. But then it was not until a few years later that a neighbor of mine actually asked me to attend the Methodist church where I grew up, which I didn't really want to do, and he said, well, we're doing this contemporary service and we'd love for you to do it. Well, that was when I first got kind of introduced to Chris Tomlin and a lot of the real contemporary Christian music of the time. And I loved it. It was transformational for me musically, to the point where then at my Methodist church I grew up in, they had a contemporary service, and they were like, well, can you play bass? And I'm thinking, well, I can play bass like a guitar player plays bass. Not very well, but I did. And then before long, they figured out I could play the piano. And then the associate pastor left, and it kind of fell to me to be the worship leader at the church for their contemporary service. And they had a guy that came in who was a worship coordinator, and he would have us do a lot of times like 5 new songs every week. It was a lot of work, but I loved it. And it really got me involved in the contemporary Christian music scene, because I studied classically when I was quite young, after I lied to my mom that I knew how to play the piano, and my reward was going to classic piano lessons for 2 years. But when I started to do this and became the worship leader, I realized that there was something that resonated with me, and that all the things that I had wanted to do all of my life as a live music guy, because I love to play music live, was something that I could do for God. I could do this for the Lord rather than for self-serving, the sex and drugs and rock and roll aspect of it. And it was actually very, very, it was very appealing, and it was something that was fulfilling for me to be able to do that, because there was a purpose behind the music. And since then it's become, I've seen that music, just as it is for me personally, has become transformational with people that attend worship services, whether it's corporate worship or maybe doing a solo. The guy that was there, who's a very good friend of mine that helped with this whole project, he used to have me he'd pick a song like, you need to do this as a special. And I remember it was just like, he heard from God, I guess, because, the people loved it. And there was like, a tremendous outpouring of Thanksgiving. And so that kind of led me into this part of being a worship leader. And then as I lost my wife in 2017, I moved and met with that same pastor who I had served under, and he encouraged me to get online. And I'm like, I'm online every day. And then I realized he meant dating. I'm like, I don't want to date. That's crazy. I just lost my best friend. And he's like, well, give it 6 or 8 months and try eHarmony. I'm thinking, how in the world does this guy know? And I asked him, I said, how do you know this? And he goes, well, I'm a good shepherd. And I thought, okay, thought he was crazy, but sure enough, that's how I met Cindy, my wife, and she had lost her husband in 2015. And we both got online, not wanting to meet anybody, but doing it for another purpose. Like she was doing it for her girlfriend to try to get her to date. I was doing it because this pastor suggested it. And I was about to quit right about the time I ended up moving, to New Mexico. And then on this online thing, I met her and went to visit. And long story short, we got married, and it's been a wonderful experience. But through that, I joined the Gideons. I'm a Gideon, and was able to do music for their statewide convention that happened to be the year following COVID. And the senior pastor that I serve under today happened to be there at a pastor's appreciation banquet and the state convention. I did a number of songs, and I gave him my card. And again, a long story short, he said, he called me about 2 weeks later, and he said, the guy that's been here for 15 years is moving immediately to Georgia, and we have this big production for Christmas we do every year, and he's not going to be here. Could you please come and help us? And I thought, wow, let me pray about it. Let me talk to my wife. And so that's how we ended up here in Northern California in the Bay Area. And so we've been here ever since. And it's, being the minister of music, it's, my title is director of music and worship, and the adult senior ministry as well. And it's just been a blessing. I've never had so much fun in my life, and all I do is music. My kids make fun of me. They're like, don't tell me, Dad, you got to go play music again. I'm like, yeah. So all my life, I just wanted to do music full time and actually be able to live and make a living. And then here out of nowhere, it just kind of came about where God was able to provide this. And of course, Cindy and I are never been happier. And it's just such a blessing to be able to minister through music and to help people. And that's the journey that got me here. And I just think that, I thank God for it, because it's been a blessing.
And the book, of course, is called Gospel Intentions, Rock and Roll Dreams, a journey from rock star to redemption. It is so cool to see all the things that God's done in your life. And it was fun to be a part of this book, watching you go through the process, but also seeing all the potential of the lives that it's going to change. And people can get the book today for free if you go to Amazon. The link is in the description or down in the comments, and we would love to have you join it.
Amen.
Jon, thanks so much for spending some time with us here on the show today.
Thank you, Steve. God bless you, sir.